Welcome to part one of Starting Your Own Business. I'm Dulce Morales. I'm the president of MSA Design and Consulting, a local small business in San Francisco specializing in transportation planning and engineering. We have been in business for 15 years. I'm also the co-chair of the WTS Programs Committee, and on behalf of the WTS and the Mineta Transportation Institute, we welcome you to our program today. How to be your own boss without going broke or crazy. I would like to also introduce my co-host, Andrea Ramirez, who will be conducting the Q&A section of the program after the speaker presentations are completed. So we encourage you to post your questions in the chat. Andrea?
Thank you, Dulce. Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Geography and Environment at San Francisco State University. My focus is transportation geology or geography and mobility justice issues. I'm also a WTS member and the co-chair for the WTS Students and Younger Members Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. The program today is sponsored by the WTS and MTI, the Mineta Transportation Institute. The WTS is dedicated to advancing the transportation industry by promoting the participation and advancement of women in the industry. We achieve our goals by creating opportunities to learn and grow no matter where you find yourself in your careers. We have a great mentorship program, and I encourage you all to partake in that. It helped me when I was very early in my career. We also have great professional development programs designed to help you develop your leadership abilities through the different points of your career path. And every year, we give $60,000 in scholarships to students both in high school as well as in college who have an interest in pursuing careers in transportation. The Mineta Transportation Institute is a leading institute for research on transportation. MTI's mission is to increase mobility for all by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of the nation's transportation system. MTI achieves its goal by providing an extensive research program through education, through workforce development programs, conferences, webinars, and professional training. We have organized a great program for you today, where small business owners from the Bay Area will share their journey to opening their own businesses. They will talk to you about why or what compelled them to start their own business, and what they wish they would have known or done before they started their companies. So let's get started with the program. And our first speaker will be Eileen Goodwin. Eileen is the president and sole proprietor of Apex Strategies, which she started in April of 1997. Her firm provides services related to program management, funding strategies, expenditure plan development, outreach, and meeting facilitation. One of her many distinctions include being awarded Women of the Year by the WTS in 1994. Eileen and her husband have 2 grown kids and 4 pets. That includes 2 Rottweilers and 2 kitty cats. Eileen, welcome.
Thanks, Dulce, for that lovely introduction. So I am going to just spend a few minutes talking a little bit about what inspired my journey to start my own business, which is probably a little bit different than some others, but maybe could be relatable in this current economy. And then I'll give you 4 topics of what I wish I would have known when I started out, and talk a little bit about the evolution there of my business. So before I started my business back in 1997, I was from 1987 to 1997, the executive director, first the deputy director, and then the executive director of the Santa Clara County Traffic Authority, which was the first self-help county, the first sales tax measure for transportation capital improvements. And so it was really exciting to be there. I loved my job. I loved working for the agency. I loved leading the agency. And what happened was they went to extend our tax, which was a 10-year sales tax. And we went out to the voters. And while we got a majority, we did not get a 2/3 vote. And the tax folks who are anti-tax sued that election, and it got caught up in the state Supreme Court, and essentially our agency that I was running needed to put itself out of business. So clearly I was out of a job. And so I had to find out what was I going to do. And so I ended up starting my own business because I had been asked by a couple of the jurisdictions that I had been working with, the city of San Jose and the city of Milpitas, approached me and said, hey, we can't afford you full time, but have you thought about being a consultant? And I really hadn't. I had done my search for other government jobs, and I didn't want to move. And so I was like, okay, maybe I could learn how to do this. And so I literally was lucky enough to get a couple of consulting projects before I actually set up my business. And so what I wish I would have learned, and what I learned along the way, was that if you are thinking about stepping out and starting your own thing, you will save yourself a lot of heartache if you go through all the administration before you tell people that you're on your own. And by that, I mean, if you have an inkling, go ahead and think about what would the name of your company be. And go ahead and do the searches that you need to search officially to find out if somebody already has that name. And then take out an ad for doing business as, because that's part of setting up your own company. You have to publish that you are behind this named company. Even if it's your own name, you need to put that out to the world. And by the way, if you want a business account at a bank, you have to have a doing business as statement. They're going to ask for that. So you have to do all that homework before. You also probably should think about, well, you know, it's nice to have a logo. So what are my colors going to be? What's my logo, or what's my look of my company? I would say definitely get that pulled together. Think about what templates you might need. Do you need a letterhead? Of course you would. So get that all set up. Of course, it's all very easy to do today with all kinds of templates that are online. Think about what your qualifications are and start putting together some statements, because whenever you team in our business, you're going to need to have a little bio about yourself and your background. You're going to need to have something about your firm, even if you're a sole proprietor like myself. And it's very important also to have a headshot, because lots of times when you're partnering with people, they'll ask you for that. So go ahead, put the makeup on and get out there and get your picture taken. And that's true with guys too. Sometimes they do powder your nose for that. So just be aware that that's something that probably should be in your kit bag too, before you hang out your shingle. The other thing that I think of when you are putting together a business that, again, I would have thought about and wished I had done, and this will be a funny story, is think about what your hourly rate is and should be. How much money do you want to make? How many hours are you willing to work? And then you have to do a lot of overhead when you own your own business. So, you know, you can't work 50, 60 hours a week without for pay. You still have additional hours where you're doing, you know, chasing jobs or doing your filing or those kinds of things. So figure out what your hourly rate is. I ended up having one of my clients actually help me set my hourly rate, which is pretty funny. Second thing, develop a pithy statement. What distinguishes you from other people in our business? That's your elevator speech, should be about 30 seconds. Next, I wish I would have known that public and private clients are okay to mingle. I started out only hanging a public shingle, and I had a lot of private people contacting me, companies and others, and I thought it wouldn't be well received if I was going across the fence back and forth. Turns out it's very well received and very common in our industry. But I was very hesitant. It took me literally over a year or more to get accept my first private sector client, and also
1 minute left.
Also institutional clients. So my fourth and final thing I wanted to put out there that I wish I would have known was thinking about who your best references are going to be. And if you're like me and you have several things that you offer, I have different references for when I work on expenditure plans or things that are related to projects getting funding than I do when I'm doing my outreach work. So think about who's your best reference. You usually need 2 or 3 of them. And here's one little tidbit. As the world has evolved in the time that I have been doing my work, which is literally now decades, I have really called on those people a lot. So make sure they're very tolerant people. They're willing to help you out. They really do support you and are willing to put the time in to be a reference for you. Because nowadays I've noticed that some of those references involve your references going online and filling out forms. It used to be somebody would just get a phone call or an email and it was pretty simple. Now being a reference is a lot more complicated. So I'll stop there, and I'm looking forward to hearing everybody's questions for me and hoping to share some more information as the meeting goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. That was very interesting. Our next speaker is Ronny Kraft. Ronny is the principal transportation planner at her firm, Ronny Kraft Consulting. She is the sole proprietor for her company, which she started in 2014. She provides services related to transportation planning, marketing research, mobility management, and GIS mapping. Ronny combines transportation with her travels. Funicular are her favorite form of transportation, and she seeks them out wherever her traveling takes her. She also enjoys building things out of wood and has made several pieces of furniture. I really would like to see those pieces. Ronny, please tell us more about your story.
Thank you. So I became interested in public transportation while at Mills, and so I did an internship at Samtrans, and I was lucky enough to find just a really wonderful mentor that taught me all about transportation planning, and I got a long heads up that she was planning to retire, and so I thought of that as a springboard for what I wanted to do next. And I definitely wanted to stay in transportation. And so I started sort of reaching out to my contacts, my network, which I cannot stress enough is so important to have. And the work that started coming up was temporary, and I guess in the back of my mind, I'd always thought I would like to eventually work for myself. So I looked into it, and as a planner, I realized I basically just need a business license, some insurance, and a laptop. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just do this until I find a steady job. But then I really started to like working for myself. And working from home, which at the time was not that common. And I started getting more projects and a diversity of projects. And I kept myself very open to the types of projects at first because I wasn't really, I didn't have a very clear niche that I really wanted to explore. And so now I've found that as I've, had a lot more experience, that I can balance the types of projects that I'm comfortable with those where I'm less comfortable but learning more, which I really appreciate. And so in terms of things that I wish I knew, I would say that your workload can be very much feast or famine, and including when you get paid. It's like the term is you're basically working for yourself. You're eating what you kill, but in this case, it can be that you're eating what you killed 3 months ago. And I'd say that, having intrinsic self-motivation every single, work day can be difficult, especially when in our industry, our projects can, last for months and years. Putting pants on helps with that, I found. Deciding whether to propose on projects on your own is a whole different experience, and I would highly suggest having mentors and a community to help you decide, especially at first, because that can be a whole new thing. And it can be really lonely working for yourself. And so I'd highly suggest, building your own network of support, and not just among other professionals, but among just friends that maybe do a completely different thing, but do also own their own business, because it's really nice to commiserate and, maybe they can't help you figure out a GIS question, but they can help, they have a good tax guy or something. And that, I feel like that's key. And I've actually, drawn on that all the time. And, having the professional network as well is very important. And I think it's been successful for me thus far because I like doing it. And so you naturally just gravitate towards people and opportunities that keep you going. That's it.
Thank you, Ronny. That's very interesting. I would really like to see some of that furniture. Great. Our last speaker for today is actually somebody who I've been very lucky to exchange a lot of information and some of the work, hopefully in the future. And that's Dominic Tafoya. Dominic is co-founder and Chief Sales and Marketing Officer for VST Engineering. VST provides transportation design services, including roadway, highway, and railway design. The company has extensive experience in program management and recently added structures and hydraulic services to their portfolio. In addition to the 3 founders, VST employs 7 people. Dominic and his partner are expecting their first baby in March. Congratulations, Dominic.
Thank you.
And they're both very excited about it. In his spare time, Dominic loves golfing and attending sporting events. Dominic, you are up.
Thank you, Dulce. And first off, thank you to WTS for hosting this fantastic event. I'm honored and humbled to be next to these very impressive panelists and business owners. So thank you. VST Engineering was founded in 2018 by Anthony Valdiosera, Michael Sandwick, and myself. And we all started as road and highway designers for a few of the large A&E firms. And the conversation about starting VST Engineering was almost 4 years before we actually got the confidence to move forward. And it started with many late night submittals and just trying to get these plan sets ready. And it was midnight, 1 in the morning, and we're just doing CAD updates and alignment updates. And we kind of just looked around, and it was always us 3 that were there late. And we figured if we're willing to work this hard for a larger company, imagine what we could do if it was for our own company. So that's kind of where the thought came from. And when we're working with a lot of these large A&E firms, we'd be coordinating with a bunch of the sub-consultants. We didn't really know the sub-consultants or the kind of whether they were DBE or just a regular surveying company. So we already had those coordination efforts with these other firms. And like I said, we figured we can go ahead and do this for ourselves. And you kind of get the feeling when you're part of a 10,000 employee firm that you're kind of just another number. And You're going from project to project. So we kind of wanted to get away from that. And when we were initially talking about starting our company, we wanted to prioritize kind of some great employee benefits with regards to like health insurance and 401k match, but most importantly, a work-life balance, and kind of not wanting to work till midnight, 1 a.m, and just kind of prioritizing that. So we also were kind of at the disposal of these larger firms to go from one design build to another design build, whether that was in Utah or Texas. We also worked abroad once or twice. So we wanted to determine kind of what projects we worked on, and we wanted to work on projects that shaped our community that we see every day. And we wanted to prioritize those type of projects. So, but not only that, we wanted to be a minority owned company. We kind of looked around the industry and we didn't see a lot of business owners that looked like us. And so we wanted to change that. And like all these conversations were happening in 2015, 2016. And we started looking at what the other panelists were looking at, whether it's company structure, a name, colors, all that, all the fun stuff. But we got cold feet in 2015 and decided to kind of just bolster our design experience a little further, get some project management. And then in 2018, it just felt like the engineering industry was just booming. There was so much work going on. It felt like everybody was hiring. So we felt like that was the good time. Now's the time to strike while the iron's hot mentality. So that's what we did. But that came with a lot of bumps and turns in the road. And I think a couple of the things that I wish we knew before we decided to pull the plug was getting your financing straight before cutting off your primary source of income. That was probably the biggest thing we wish we would have done. And that's talking to the bank. And I mean, this is before you're actually getting work, but when you have that constant paycheck coming in, the banks are a little more willing to give you financing. So that's definitely one thing we wish we would have done. But one thing we did do right is we got a CPA that was very well rehearsed in FAR compliance, because we knew a lot of our contracts were going to be federally and state funded. Which means they just have different requirements when it comes to your overhead and what's allowable and what's not allowable. So getting that CPA on was huge, because like I said, we're designers at heart. So we didn't know how to run a company. We weren't business people. We were just kind of learning as we went, and getting that advice from someone in finance was everything. She's helped us out tremendously. So. And another thing that I wish we knew was your connections and your relationships within the industry. When you're
1 minute left.
First, when you're a business owner, they change drastically. Somebody can be in your on your side when you're working for a larger company, but when you go to them for a task order, the tune changes a little bit. So you have to make sure that your connections are very personal and you trust them. Before kind of jumping out on your own. And another huge thing that we noticed when we did start this, that a lot of the support and encouragement came from other small businesses. It wasn't these large firms. The large firms do have programs to help DBEs and introduce you to their staff, but it was other small business owners that were able to share their stories, how they got their financing, how they provided growth. So yeah. The other small businesses are your real advocates. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dominic. I'm very happy to hear your story. That was really interesting. We're going to continue with Andrea, who will take over the Q&A part of the program today, and she'll also close up with some of the announcements that we have for the future. Andrea?
Thank you, Dulce. And thank you, panelists. That was like really good information for someone who's just getting out of school and kind of deciding what I'm planning to do for the future. That was really solid information for me to think about for my future. Getting into the Q&A, The first question, I'm going to ask each of the panelists respond to it. And it's a 4-part question, so let me know if you would like me to repeat any of it. The first question is, what are some considerations to think about when deciding to start your own business? What are the biggest barriers to entry? What are the major risks? And what are the big decisions you have to make? Yeah, and I'll start with Eileen.
Okay, well, I think one of the biggest decisions, I'm going to take these a little out of order, that you have to make is how you are setting up your company. What is it? Are you a sole proprietor like myself? Are you a partnership? Are you a LLC? What are you? Because each one of those has its own risks and rewards. And so that's something you really need to think about and get into. And I did notice in the chat, there's a specific question about legal. So I'm imagining we might circle back to that topic. So that I'll leave that at that right there. One of the biggest barriers, I think Dominic and Rory touched on, which is this idea of how long can you feed yourself and what's your risk tolerance there. And I completely agree that we eat what we kill, and sometimes it's quite a long time before we get that food. And different clients have different pays. I have a couple of clients where I'm direct to them and they'll pay me within a month. I put in my invoice at the end of the month and voila, it's in my checking account. I have big firms that I'm sub to where it can take 9 months. And that's with me chasing them around and begging and et cetera. And because they don't have people who they're getting their direct deposit of their own salary. So they are not as aware. They are, a lot of times the people you're working with, their accounting people are literally overseas, or they're in a place like Atlanta. And so they just put things in and go off and do their engineering, and they have no idea how far out they are in their payments. So that's something that is a big barrier. So pick your clients wisely. And I think Dominic is absolutely right too, when he talked about who are your real friends and who are your frenemies. Because some people that you're competing with will act like they're friends, but they're really not. And so it takes a little bit of sea legs to figure out who you can partner with, even if you have very similar skill sets. And I do actually have some people who I think the industry might think are competitors, where we've actually found a synergy. Where we actually team extremely well together because they have a lot of back shop and I don't. And they don't really have the same Rolodex I do. So it's a perfect marriage. And I think that's really what Dominic was also alluding to when he was talking about, who are your biggest supporters? And they turned out to be a really great partner throughout my whole decades of work. And then I'll stop with one last thought, which is one of the other barriers that Rory talked about, which is self-motivation and also the ability to work on your own by yourself a lot of the time, especially if you choose to be a sole proprietor versus a partnership. One final caveat is I have a very good friend who was a partnership and her partner took her to the cleaners. In other words, spent a lot of money on the corporate card, and that ended up coming out of my friend's pocket. So things like that can really influence you. And she's not in our industry. It was a completely different industry, but it really harmed them financially as a family. So something to think about if you do choose partnering is who, can you really trust that person? Because this person thought she could, and it turned out she couldn't. So I'll stop there.
Well, very important points. Ronny, same question.
Okay, well, I'll be honest, I didn't really think about a lot of the business aspects when prior to doing it. And because I just thought, well, I'm sole proprietor, and I realized that it's a really good, pretty advantageous time to be working for yourself, given that there's so many free or inexpensive online tools, especially I guess in my line of work as a planner. And so the more that I looked into it, I thought, wow, this is actually something feasible. I'd say, yeah, definitely the risk is not knowing when you get paid. If I could reiterate that, that's probably one of the hardest things is, especially if you're a sub-consultant or even a sub-consultant to a sub-consultant to a prime, to a slow-paying public agency, that that can really mess you up, especially on larger projects. And it's something that I would recommend, if you can, sort of sussing out before you start. Because if you have a network of other people, sometimes that information is actually already out there, and you can ask, and people will remember that stuff, especially other, sole proprietors and small firm owners like, ourselves. Like, it's really great to be able to talk to each other and know beforehand if that's going to be the situation. Yeah, I think that's about it I can think of. Risks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Dominic, any additional thoughts on?
Yeah, I'll try to wrap this up real quick, but I admire both Eileen and Ronny, because I have two other business partners, and it is a real checks and balances kind of environment. I could not imagine doing this by myself. I feel very overwhelmed as being a third part of this. So picking your business partners is very important. Like I said, we have a very checks and balances thing at VST. Anthony is as CEO, he's very calculated, and he looks at aspects of relationships that I wouldn't. Michael is very technically sound. He's one of the best technical engineers that I've met. And then I have no problem talking to a crowd, which is why I'm here, right? So we kind of have a real good balance going. And I think choosing your business partners is very, very important. Another thing Eileen mentioned was company structure. When we first started this, we created an LLC, and then until we got legal advice saying, hey, you can't use your professional license as an LLC. So we had to dissolve the LLC and then make a corporation. So we had no idea. Again, we're engineers, right? So there is plenty of outlets in Oakland, East Bay Score. There's plenty of engineer or legal advice that you can get for just a consultation for free before you go into that. So I would explore those avenues and get as much information on the type of structure that you want. And if you have business partners, please, make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and you have full trust like it's a family member. So.
And thank you for bringing up the fact that there are so many free resources available out there. I used to work for a CDFI, so that was my job, to talk to businesses and let them know what resources are available to them for free. So that's really cool to hear.
Yep, and you can just use the internet and Google it, and they pop up, and they're excited to talk to you, right? They're not going to push you off and give you a call a week later. They're responsive. They want to help small businesses. They want to help minority-owned businesses. And there's plenty of meat on the bone for everybody. That's one thing I've noticed, is there's so much work out there. We don't need to be fighting with each other. We can help and utilize our resources. And because the second you start fighting with each other is the second they're the project manager on your next project. And it's really awkward. So keep your relationships tight.
Great advice. So I'm going to go to the first attendee question. A question was asked, what about the legal structure of your consulting practice? Did you hire a lawyer to set that up? And what about liability? I think originally this was geared towards Eileen.
Get myself unmuted. So I did think a lot about what I should be. And I actually am married to a lawyer, so let's just say there was a trade. I'll leave it at that. But we did think about, what would make the most sense. And there was a lot of pressure. The LLC it was very trendy back then. And I had fellow sole proprietors who set that up as LLC. But it turns out when you take some of these more corporate structures, you end up with corporate responsibilities. So you need to have a lot of paperwork, you need to register with the state, you need to do things that as a sole proprietor, you don't need to do. Now, in retrospect, let me put this out there for those of you who haven't started a business yet. I am not a DBE. And the reason why I'm not, even though I'm a woman and I'm a small business and all of that, is because over the decades that I've been in business, it used to be really easy to be a DBE and SBE, et cetera. You just said, hey, I'm a sole proprietor and here it is. Now, I think there's been so much abuse that they really want your taxes and they want all this stuff, which as a sole proprietor actually is my personal taxes. It's my personal social security number. It is my taxes with my husband. It's our joint resources because we own a house, all that. And so I am very uncomfortable putting all that on the internet that's out there because it's a recipe for stealing my identity. So I have not done that. And when I started, I really was, because it was so much easier. And that has evolved. So perhaps now, if I were to start, I would really reconsider being something where I get a different number, not my social security number. I get a company number, and then it's the company's financials that you would submit to a BART or to a Caltrans or the certifying agency. So I'm in it now because I'm at the other end of my career, and I might really have rethinking things, although it's worked out great for me being a sole proprietor. The other benefit, and then I'll turn it over to others, of being a sole proprietor is I don't have to carry as much insurance. So I don't have to have workers' comp, because as a sole proprietor, you are the only employee. So you just by statute say, well, that's what it is. And the other thing, and I'm imagining Ronnie similar to this, is I don't have a license. So what Dominic was mentioning about being a licensed engineer, or some of you are architects, you all have a different level of liability than I ever would doing outreach and funding, because the bridge is not going to fall down because of me. It might because of some of the other people on this call. So I've been able to get exempted from that, but I'll tell you, every contract I get into, it's a big conversation and a lot of back and forth. And I love, because I type in there that I'm not a professional, so I can't have professional liability. And of course, people are like, wait, but you're a professional. I'm like, well, what they mean by that is professionally licensed. And because outreach is not a licensed thing, like a doctor, or architect, or an engineer, I can't get that insurance because I can do E&O, I do the auto, but those are the two that I carry. So with that, I'll turn it over to some of the other panelists.
Do either of the other panelists have anything to add?
Yeah. So that's the insurance was a real big thing for us. Obviously, we do have licensed engineers on staff, and it was a little overwhelming at the very beginning because you have to get this insurance, but you don't have any work. So it's a real timing issue at the very beginning. But once you get that insurance and everything's buttoned up, when we first started, we didn't need workers' comp because it was an owner-ran company. Once we hired our first employees, that's when the workers' comp has to kick on. And it's based on salary, so you can kind of gauge what to expect, and you can kind of forecast what those insurance requirements are going to be. And the insurance, it wasn't a lot at the very beginning. It's a real minor, because there's no risk. We didn't have a lot of risk at the beginning, but as we started winning contracts and as we started getting our backlog, obviously the insurance company sees the revenue, and then the insurance starts to drastically increase. But again, you can plan for that in your budgeting and in your overhead, and that can all be accounted for. But as Ronnie mentioned at the beginning, when you win a project in March, you might not see a cent of that until the following year in March. So it's a big planning game. You gotta analyze the risk. But once that the invoices start to get paid, it's so rewarding. You're starting to create the company that means the most to you. And like I said, when we're part of these larger engineering firms, it didn't feel like our input was taken seriously. So now it is. And we want to listen to our employees. We want to offer paternal leave and all the maternity leave from the beginning.
Okay. So the next question is, can the panelists speak more to strategizing and finding a balance between between being more specialized in a few areas and services and working more broadly as a jack of all trades as a sole proprietor / small business owner? And this is open to the panel.
Yeah, that was kind of an issue for us. We're design engineers, but we had to decide whether to go for small city roadway, curb and gutter jobs, or try to be a sub-consultant on some of these larger $500 million jobs where they have these DBE requirements. That was a discussion that we had internal a lot. At every meeting, it was how are we going to no-go this project? Is it worth our time? Are we going to get a good chunk of work out of this? So that's just a determination you need to talk with your business partners, and I'm sure Eileen and Ronny have a different take on that, but we had to kind of make the decision to go all in on, one of our things was program management, and as polarizing as California high-speed rail is, it bolstered our business, and it was reliable, and it was good work, and we just kind of stayed on that track.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Just backing up real quick, I understand the DBE reluctance, but as I guess a single person, I've found that it's been very helpful, and I have a EIN to protect me, but I also understand that as a sole proprietor, it's pretty scary. I think also, though, being a San Francisco LBE is very much worth it. In terms of insurance, I think finding a company that doesn't actually work with organizations that need licensure and the ones that have lower risk will have much better rates, and I could send that information out if you would like, because that was huge. That was a huge expense at first, and now it's definitely not. And then in terms of specialization, I thought that it was important at first to find my one niche, and that everything would come together once I just started having work thrown at me because I had this one niche. And I think I now have several, but I think I just prefer to be a bit more diversified, and it seemed to work for my other people that I work with that are either sole proprietors or small firms. Having a few specialties kind of is the point of working for yourself and having the freedom to pick which projects you want to do, and that's worked out for me. But it's taken some time. It's like I said earlier, it's it doesn't just come right away to be able to choose.
So thinking about the niche question and the diversification, I like to have a variety of things that I offer. I started out doing a lot of work in a bunch of different buckets just because of my background and what people needed, and each client needed something a little bit different. And I've just kept that going. And I find for mental health reasons, it's nice to pop around from, because a lot of what I do is meeting facilitation, really angry groups who don't want something, because the easy meetings, they don't hire me for whatever reason. So I'm there to catch tomatoes. And that can be a pretty grueling thing. And so it's nice then to go then the next day, and I'm working on a funding strategy, or I'm looking at polling, or I'm doing something where nobody's yelling at me. So I found that to be very helpful and sort of refreshing. And then because I have a certain personality, and I think we all do, and it takes a bit of, somebody believing in yourself and kind of knowing yourself to do this. And some people are better than others at doing the hunt and doing the marketing part. And I've watched people who don't enjoy that part. And frankly, then they're pretty miserable as sole employees, and they tend to go back into government or back into a bigger firm, because this is challenging in some ways. I love it. And so for me, the hunt and the kill is the best part. And doing the work is like, oh yeah, I won that job, didn't I? Now I actually have to do it. So there's a point here. So when I don't get too diverse in the sense of offering a skill I don't really like to do. So while I work on funding plans and all that, I'm like, okay, so there's the TECP funds, and we should do this, and we should go for this in this year and whatever. And then somebody says, well, do you want to fill out that grant application? That is nope, because that's a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of calculating things and stuff that I just don't love. And frankly, as a sole proprietor, I hate putting together the last day of the month when I do my invoices. The only joy I have is when I've printed them all off and I see the total for the month. That makes me happy. The actual invoice itself is torture. So anything that looks like a job with a lot of paperwork is not the job for me. Kind of like Dominic, I like to be in front of the room. That's fun. This other back part is not so fun. So I really look for jobs where my skills, I like to write, but I don't like to do all that fussy handwork stuff. So
That's
be careful,
so funny you say that.
You know, on that. You relate to?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we first started VST, it was because your relationships that you thought was going to get you the work initially, they fall through and you don't get the task order or you don't get the contract. You're like, well, crap, what are we going to do? So like our motto really at the beginning was VST engineering when no one else wants to do it. Like when we got on the high-speed rail project, we were going down to Fresno every week from Oakland. We were meeting with the contractors. We were doing design reviews. It was not glamorous, but you need to set that track record. You need to have people see that you can do the job under your umbrella. Yeah, they've seen us do the job under this large A&E firm, but when it's you and all the responsibilities on you, your client needs to see that you can actually do it. So we did a lot of dirt work at the very beginning. But now once you start establishing yourself, like you said, you can start picking and choosing scope out of these projects that you know you want your firm to be highlighted for. So that mentality changes because we have a completely different mindset on looking at projects than we did in 2018.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. And this one's directed towards Eileen. You touched on the hourly rate. Could you give some hints on how to define that?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about how my my client helped me set mine. So I was coming out of a salaried position. And so I had expectations that I would make at least that much money. And so that was sort of my bottom line. So you pick your number. You're coming out of whatever, or you want to make 20% more than what you've been making, or you just find your number. And then you have to kind of think realistically that probably in the beginning, you're probably not going to be able to bill more than half time, right? In a 40-hour week, maybe you're billing 20 hours, or maybe it's 30, but it's certainly not going to be 60 when you first start. And so what would that math look like to get to the number you're going to try and hit? And then you go, holy moly, that's twice as much as anybody else doing this work is getting. So that's probably not realistic. Or yeah, it's right in there with what everybody else is getting. And so I should choose that. So I think part of it is setting your number, figuring out realistically what are your hours that you're willing to work or could work, doing that math, and then benchmarking it with your competition. And I have chosen to be slightly below some of the people who are in my pond. And that has worked out really well for me because people might pick me because I am slightly less, but then they get addicted and I get to stick around. And so that part has worked out well. So I would say, don't try and make it all in one project. Don't set your bar so high that it's a turnoff. On the other hand, especially for maybe some of you who are a bit younger, especially I found when I've mentored females that somehow you guys deduct more than a male that I've mentored. So be tough on yourself. In other words, force yourself to get a good number and then make sure that it's within the range of what it would be if you were working for somebody else. And I think that's how I would set it if I were looking to set my rate. And then don't be shy about advancing your rate. That's the thing I was not good enough about in my beginning. And I'm still playing catch up 30 years later for not holding, because especially when you're sub to a larger firms, they give themselves raises, but they don't always tell you that they're going to the client and getting a raise. So you get, technical term here is screwed. And so, and I see Dominic snapping his head because you got to stick up for yourself. And I would say that's something that, you know, to watch for as you get into these longer jobs where you're on something for several years and you're like, hey, wait a minute, I'm still billing at my old rate. Everybody else got promoted and whatever. So you have to fight for yourself.
If I could just add a second to that. Yeah, when I decided to go off on my own, I was discussing this with my mentor and someone else, and they're saying that's just ridiculously, you know, low. And I thought, well, that's still way more than I was making, you know, hourly. And so what I ended up going was with what my previous company was actually charging for me. And
Perfect.
that was still pretty low as a like, and competitive. So I didn't know what else to do, and it's, you know, worked out since then. But I would also agree with Eileen in that, yeah, remember to give yourself raises, because I've been pretty bad at that, and it just kind of happens. And yeah, you gotta remember, oh, hey, you know, and also title changes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started out as principal and now I'm president.
Yeah.
It's still me.
Oh, you? Yeah.
It's funny to do for yourself, right? But you need to.
Yeah. And then in my environment, a lot of our high-speed rail, BART, VTA, they have approved rates for certain staff that you want to do. So if our rate was too high, I mean, we're not going to get approved on the project. So we ended up backing into our rates and dealing with the overhead and learning that all this direct labor that you have, well, guess what? You have to spend that overhead money too to justify your rates. So it was a big learning experience and learning curve for us, because once we started, all of us were billable. We didn't understand that we have to spend all this overhead money, whether it's on software or computers or office supplies. You have to justify that number. And we just went through our first audit to get our rates auditable this past year, which was an eye-opening experience in itself, because they dive in on every purchase and every hour that you've built, and whether it goes in your home office or your field office, or it's a big labyrinth of fringe overhead rates and everything like that. So determining your rate, I mean, you can't go crazy for it, and you don't want to go too low, like Ronny was mentioning, because you're not going to be able to get the growth that you're expecting. So and then with regards to the raises, I know a lot of the contracts that we're on account for a 3% escalation after a year. So you'll have to build those into your rates and your forecast and everything along those lines. So it was definitely a learning process for us on finding the sweet spot for those rates and when to give yourself a raise, because we didn't want to give ourselves a raise and then we're not competitive or we're too expensive for the roles we already have. So we passed on raises before, only to keep our rates palatable.
I think we might have lost Andrea. So while she comes back in, I'm going to follow up with another question. And it's this great discussion regarding the raise. Can you please advise on adjusting rates for inflation and how to inform a client about the increase? That's a very good question.
Does somebody want to go first?
I mean, ours for most of our escalations, it's in the fee proposal that we've had, and it's in the it's kind of built into the projects that we have, because we're not at least for VST, we're not on 3-month projects and then they're done. Our programs are 5-10 years long, so those escalation rates were built in per the client's request. so they knew about them.
Yeah, actually, usually most of the contracts tell you when you will be allowed to increase your rate. So
Yeah.
part of that standard agency contract tells you that.
Right. And then the other thing is, if you have a direct contract with somebody, generally you have a contract person that's your liaison, that's your client in your brain that you think of, this is my person, even if maybe you're working with 5 or 6 people of that particular agency. And so I've had conversations where I've said, hey, I do need to raise my rate. You know, I'm getting bumped up on these other projects because that's how it's working. And so if you want me to continue on, I do need to be paid, because otherwise what happens is, if you haven't raised your rate in a couple of years and you're getting, you know, hundreds of dollars an hour, then all of a sudden that means that you're working for somebody at 30 or 40 bucks less an hour than you're working for somebody else. Whose phone call are you going to call back, right? And so you have to kind of educate sometimes your clients that my differential is so much that it's in your own interest to keep me close to what I'm getting in some of these other projects, if you want me to continue to pay the amount of attention that I'm paying to you. So you kind of have to have that frank conversation. I've done that over lunch when I picked up the tab.
Great. And this is actually, I'm going to ask this last question because we only have about 4 to 5 minutes left. As my own business owner, how much time do you guys spend on marketing? Because I seem to spend quite a bit of time doing marketing over and over again. So I like to hear your experience.
So Dolce, could you explain what you mean by marketing? Because I think of that in several different buckets. And so when you say you spend a lot of time, which tasks are you actually speaking about?
Yeah, what are you doing?
Well, as I mentioned, I specialize in transportation planning and engineering, and I kind of feel that at least 20 to 25% of my time is spent making the connection, talking to the agencies, talking to people in the WTS, people in CCMMA, you know, so all of that stuff takes a lot of time. And when I'm doing my timesheet at the end of the week, it's like, oh my God, yes, I did my work, but on top of that, I have at least 10, 15 hours of networking and events like that. And I kind of wonder if this is too much. Am I going crazy doing this? So I want to share with you guys, what do you do?
Yeah, that's for me, it's going to be a little different than Ronny and Eileen, because there's 3 of us for the founders. So I love doing the marketing. I love getting out there. But I think one of the biggest things that's helped us is volunteering. I recently was nominated to the board of directors for CMAA, and just the exposure that you get to other people in the industry. Our industry is relationship based. Don't get it twisted. The people that you're close with and the people that trust you, those are the people that are going to give you work when they're in the position to do that. So when it comes to, I don't even know if you call it marketing, but volunteering for a lot of these programs, it really helps you get exposure. And then LinkedIn, I mean, it's huge, right? Spend your time, read what's going on with the other big firms, follow the big firms, follow the transportation projects that you want to be a part of. So LinkedIn is big. And then one thing that I wish we knew before is, if you go to a pre-bid, you're already dead in the water without a relationship or without pre-positioning yourself. So talking to the agencies before that. But I would say a good 25 to 30% of my time is based on the marketing and the pre-positioning on top of the direct labor that we already have.
So basically you do mostly marketing for your company.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, that's mainly my role. And then Michael and Anthony take more of the operations and the hiring and the growth under their wing. So
great. Ladies, any more comments? I think we are about done. I'm going to say thank you to the speakers for coming and for our audience. And I would like to invite you to the next programs that are coming up. As you know, this is part of a 3-session series We have session 2 in March and the last on April. I believe we were supposed to have a little slide there for the projects coming up. I don't think they're there. I think that has to do with the fact that Andrea got dropped off. But again, on behalf of the MTI and the WTS, we thank you all for participating. Our speakers, great information provided. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah,
Good luck,
thank you.
everybody who's going to step out on their own. We're cheering
Yes,
for you.
please
Yeah,
do it. Make the jump. It's not
Yeah,
hard.
it's
You can
cool.
do it.
It's
happy
really
to
fun.
continue sharing information.
Yes.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.